Congratulations, Boneworks. You're now the most modern game I've played for this channel, and yes, I do consider you a game. I had lesser opinions on Boneworks. I saw that it wasn't reaching its full potential, and I was disappointed until Half-Life Alyx came out and I realized just how precious something like Boneworks really is. Did I beat it in under 4 hours? Yeah, I also played it 10 times and can tell you that my run-through was fairly economical. The first time I played this game, I had a blast fully exploring levels and clocked a run-through at around 8 hours. At launch, the no mid-level saving and not recording any of the objects I collected my first playthrough because I didn't get the hidden sandbox module was annoying, and there were a fair few puzzles that relied a bit too much on the physics. The game's also on the easy side, at least from my perspective. I'm in the minority of people who can handle running at high speeds in VR with smooth turning, giving me a distinct advantage over people who need to take the headset off every 15 minutes to recover. I'm also a gameplay-oriented person, which is fortunate because Boneworks' story is anemic.
Okay, so little update. We can see what's going on, and something is definitely controlling the Nullmen.
We're not going to talk about the story. Got it? I don't have high expectations for VR games to fully utilize interactive storytelling, considering it's still in the experimental phase in terms of control systems and gameplay mechanics, which is where Boneworks really shines. To start, I'm playing on the Valve Index, a headset I bought specifically for Boneworks, although far more people bought the headset for Half-Life Alyx. I, like a lot of other people, saw the Node video on this up-and-coming game and was impressed. I had a slight interest in virtual reality, but here's the thing. Certain people like to treat VR like it's going to replace conventional gaming entirely, and I don't think this is the case. I don't even think in an era of holodecks people will put down conventional screen gaming, and the reason is that certain styles of games and mechanics will not translate. Is chess really improved by a life-size arena where you shout out commands? No. Chess players want a small board where they can make moves really fast. My interest in VR came down to being more interested in a new way to play video games. Was it expensive? Yeah, most hobbies are. The best way I can explain VR is that it feels like you're really there. No, that's actually the worst and most condescending way to explain it. The best way to explain it is that in a flat game you move the mouse towards you to look up, at least if you invert your y-axis. In VR you actually look up because what you're looking at is above you. Enemies in a flat game look small. In VR, those same enemies are the same scale as you. What you're seeing isn't exactly what I was seeing, as this is a more narrow field of view. Mechanically, Boneworks is great, which is interesting because if you took these same mechanical concepts and put them in a normal FPS, it would be considered rather simple, even bare bones. Each level you're reset in terms of your items. What you have access to is controlled on a per level basis, with you exploring environments to find various items. This is a mixture of classic melee weapons and firearms. You have 5 physical inventory slots, 1 for each shoulder, 1 under each arm, and 1 on your back. This means partway through the level you will have to make a choice about what weapons you carry. Ammo can be found through levels, hidden in lockers and desks or in crates that need to be broken open that are hidden everywhere. This ammo comes in 2 universal types, light and heavy, corresponding to which weapon you're using. Part of the lack of difficulty comes down to a lack of proper resource management. Weapons may not carry over through level transitions, but ammo will. If you do something as basic as just pick up every ammo drop you see, you will quickly come into an excess that I don't think is possible to actually fully utilize in combat. Given what Stress Level 0 said about mid-level saving and how they were surprised that people were spending 2 hours on the streets level, I suspect the level designers didn't realize just how much of an impact a lack of restraint in terms of ammunition had on this game. In terms of weapons, we'll start with the melee weapons. Melee in VR is always going to be awkward. Boneworks tries to counteract this by simulating the player's virtual body. This solution worked pretty well, but melee combat was just... well, I didn't do much of it for the recording beyond what I had to. This is partially an AI problem. You'll mostly fight zombies physically. Because the zombie AI is simple and just translates its position towards the player, it will close the gap you need to properly swing a weapon, turning the fight into a confusing wrestling match. So for most enemies, it's better to use firearms. There are 2 pistols. Well, they technically added a 3rd, but it's not in the campaign, so... There's the license-free Glock 22 that they decided to make a 9mm for some reason, and there's a 1911. Glock does less damage but has more ammo, 1911 does more damage but has less. It's 15+1 versus 7+1. It's a simple balance that means I always chose the Glock because in a battle between capacity and power, capacity will always win, at least when weight isn't in the picture. Handguns are great for a lot of reasons. They can be fired easily with one hand for starters, so while climbing or in an emergency you always have that option. They're even more stable should you add a second hand to the grip. I can then use my real thumb across each controller to reduce sway, even if that probably confuses the index controller as to how many fingers I have. I mean, Valve were surprised at how fast people were playing Beat Saber. I have no doubt they're using telemetry to count how many fingers the average person has. There are then SMGs. These are trash and should be avoided. There's a micro Uzi, a few variants of MP5K, and the MP5 proper. Their only benefit is that they take from the light ammo pool, but considering what I said about the game's inflated ammo economy, I would not worry about it. They get massively overshadowed by the heavy weapons in terms of power and lack the benefit of one-handed use like the handguns. This leads us into the heavy weapons, which is a misnomer because 5.56 is not a heavy round and a few assault rifles aren't heavy weapons. A rocket launcher is a heavy weapon, and AR is mid-tier. These guns are divided into M16s and Mark 18s. They are all fairly identical in function, but with some added attachments vary in usefulness. In order of most to least useful, laser sight M16, holographic Mark 18s, ACOG M16, everything else. The laser sight reigns supreme because of its high visibility, aiding my already natural ability to line up shots. The holographics are also easy to use, the ACOG was fun for the few minutes it was available, and everything else would just sit on my shoulder unless I encountered more than 3 enemies at once. One problem is that you can't slap the bolt release on the AR platform guns. Okay, hold on. You see this paddle thing here? When the bolt's back, which happens after you empty a magazine, this paddle's positioned so that you can press it with your thumb to release the bolt, which cycles the next round. The game instead expects you to either pull the trigger, which wouldn't do anything, or pull the charging handle, which also wouldn't do anything. Okay, gripe over. There are no shotguns, no sniper rifles, no actual heavy weapons, and only a few types of what is there. In terms of weapons, it's almost a demonstration of the technical variety. This leads into the enemies, divided into 3 categories: head crab zombies, and hecumarines. Wait, sorry, it's head crabs, zombies, and drones with guns, and the occasional sentry turret. These 3 types informs the basics of most first-person shooters. The first you encounter, zombies, are pretty basic enemies. What makes them interesting is the fact that their animations are done with inverse kinematics, so zombies who have been wounded in various places will start moving differently. But this also means that zombies have difficulty with stairs. The problem is that zombies simply are not challenging. Even in numbers, I never felt like I was in danger, and I believe this to be in part a level design issue. The level in the sewers was one of the more interesting levels because you had to go through a couple zombies before you found a gun, including a rare type which shoots some kind of ranged digital attack that does a ton of damage. While these guys present more risks, their powers being visually displayed undercuts their threat level because it means they can be easily identified and shot first. Guns have always invalidated the threat of zombies, and the ammo oversaturation in Boneworks means they never stood a chance. The same is technically true of the head crabs, but they're much more fun to fight. They're also animated with IK, but their unusual shape and methods of attack make this more interesting. The crablets will attempt to latch onto the player's head and drag them further into VR while slashing you up. It is a lot of fun dodging them or timing swings to hit them mid-jump, which makes it a shame that they are not a threat. Their more erratic behavior makes them harder to shoot, but it's not impossible, and they don't do enough damage even in packs to kill you. This leads into the third enemy type that does actually pose a threat, but by far the least interesting of the 3, the drones. These are robots that project an outer holographic body attached to a rolling ball. They have firearms and will engage all targets in a level. Because their weapons are raycasted and they have the least robust movement of the 3 types, they're just sort of things you have to shoot. My only death in the recording is owed to them because there were a large number of them in an area effectively operating as turrets. In large part, Boneworks is a game of levels, more so than ever before. The first 2 levels are a tutorial, which runs rather long but is effectively a comprehensive introduction to virtual reality, including optional lessons in the history of the technology and opportunities to interact with the mechanics. The problem is the game has difficulty deciding whether it wants to cover the story or the mechanics first. It felt like 2 different people created tutorials at stress level 0 and they couldn't decide which was better, so they included both, meaning that the early part of the museum includes redundant movement tutorials. It's also called the Museum of Technical Demonstration, a fitting name from the development team of Self-Consciousness. It's very clear that Stress Level 0 is pretending to not be booty bothered by people calling their games tech demos, which I would agree is an unfair assessment. There are plenty of VR games that are tech demos, while SLZ at least seems interested in making actual games. But this won't be the last time that they try to pretend their game they made for the express purpose of demonstrating technical advancements in virtual reality is not a tech demo. So let's get into the basics of movement. I wouldn't ordinarily cover this, but seeing as this may be some of my viewers' first experience with VR, I'll talk about it. Generally, it's possible for me to walk around my physical environment to navigate in VR, but the virtual space is much bigger than the physical space, so you can use the left joystick to move around. This makes it possible to play the game both standing and even sitting, although if you choose the latter, I recommend a drum throne. Looking around is similar. I can look around the environment, but certain directions tend to desync the headset more due to losing sight with the base station, so instead you can use the right joystick to look around. Most people will use snap turning, which increments the camera a set amount of degrees at a time, but this looks much worse for the camera. So I used smooth turning, which operates more like a traditional joystick and often sends players to the vomitorium. They just need to get good. Jumping's done with the right A button and can be charged by crouching. Crouching can be done physically or virtually with the right controller. Crouching is essential for climbing as it allows you to hoist your legs up onto the surface you're climbing to without the need for additional trackers on your feet and also a physical wall for you to climb. You can then pick up objects which have realistic weights, requiring two hands if they're heavy enough to move. Many interactable objects can also be force grabbed, flying the objects directly to the player. So with our bases covered, we can get into the levels proper. Cutscene and tutorial, at the end of the museum we get dumped into the first real level, the streets. I don't really consider the first level and the Museum of Tech demo to be real levels. They are instead a 15-minute tutorial. Well, 15 minutes if you just walk through and don't do anything. The streets level starts outside the museum. You go through an abandoned playground and eventually into a hallway where you'll encounter the first Null Man, currently deactivated. After using a hammer the wrong way to break some boards, we get outside into an employee area. The way I would describe the visual design of the game is like intentional programmer graphics. The game looks like a polished prototype pack you'd download for Unity, which makes sense given the world is actually a work in progress virtual reality space. It bears mentioning here because of the obvious grid structure of the ground and bare-bones object placement. It works because the game would obviously strain over realistic environmental needs for physics objects, especially in virtual reality, but they can get away with the style because it is a simulation. This courtyard here was host to a raffle which rewards a key card in the 8th box you break. What's nice here is that the game doesn't waypoint that you need to get the key card here. You could absolutely get to the point where you need the key card and be confused had you ignored and walked past this area. But the area is designed well enough that the eye is immediately drawn to the raffle, and human curiosity should inspire people to want to open the raffle boxes. Should that fail, there's a Null Man that the player might attack that will invariably break open a raffle box or two themselves, and the sentry turret in the next area provides a decent chance the player may die and respawn, having to walk by the raffle again. This is relevant because if Boneworks was an easily accessible flat game, then some games journalist reviewing it would invariably complain about getting stuck here for 30 minutes because they didn't understand the intuitive level design that went into this area. Boneworks is able to respect the intelligence of the player in its design because of its limited access, and this isn't the last time the game will commit what are often called faux pas by plebs. Heading on, this sentry turret poses an obvious threat to the player, with multiple paths around it. Players can use trash can lids as shields to break line of sight, or climb a wall to get past the turret. This leads into a recess where the player will encounter their first crablet should they attempt to get the ammo next to it, leading to an inevitable struggle in a closed space as a solid first encounter for this enemy type. This was where I encountered a door that opens straight into a wall. This adds to the visual aesthetic of the game, showing the in-universe designers as spacing out the future work areas the same way this would be done by a real designer of a virtual space. Now that might seem like masturbatory praise, so let's go to a criticism. This work area we unlock here has a wheel that's tied to a crane that is dangling giant containers that we use to knock over a wall. This serves no actual purpose and wouldn't exist in real life, and it shouldn't exist in a digital world either. It's even a prize from winning the raffle to gain access to this room. It undercuts the theme of tech corporations being ruthless to characterize said corporation as allowing and rewarding employees with physics puzzles, unless it's commentary on Valve. Further on, after the blue keycard, we encounter the first of many vending machines. These machines take ammo as payment and allow early access or sometimes just normal access to weapon types. You can get your first gun here, which is a trap because you'll find a gun not long after in the environment. That itself is often a problem because the level designers, while demonstrating competence in areas of intuition, didn't seem keen on the idea of controlling the flow of weapons through levels. And it can really undermine the thrill of finding a secret, only for it to be outclassed by something that was more obviously placed in a level. Overall, I completely ignored the vending machines during my recorded playthrough, except on the final level where it was the only access to a weapon. The vending machines provide a fantastic opportunity to control the excess of ammo that players are carrying, which can create some much needed tension, but they may have shied away from that idea due to a final vending machine near the end of the game that is used to unlock various gadgets for the sandbox mode. If players are running out of ammo, that means they definitely won't have enough to buy anything at this vending machine. Something that was all but confirmed by the fact that when I reached this machine I had a total of 20,000 rounds despite liberal usage of firearms, being more than enough to buy something from it. While this means that the levels are overall well designed to ensure players will have enough to engage with this final machine, I will again stress that it undercuts any tension the game can have, and all this for gadgets that honestly should have just been hidden around levels in Boneworks crates like the balloon gun is. These Boneworks crates are sometimes good rewards for exploration, and sometimes they provide a cheap sandbox unlock disproportionate to the amount of effort the puzzle requires, which was just salt in the wound for the game considering it didn't even register any of my unlocks from my first playthrough as I hadn't gathered the sandbox module, which at the time was hidden in the museum behind a locked wall that I couldn't unlock without restarting the game and arbitrarily deciding to archive all the objects despite instructions otherwise. Yes, I am salty even after they fixed it. I guess on the topic, sandbox modes are to me often the least interesting aspect of a game. They certainly provide an excellent opportunity to quickly demonstrate some ideas for a video, but by themselves when I'm not recording aren't really a draw. I definitely know for a fact that I'm not as creative as I used to be, but really, what does that say? It says that I'm not as easily impressed by literally everything anymore. I can still find creative solutions to problems, and I often more so enjoy games that present problems for me to solve creatively. In terms of creatively solving problems, however, this next area has a gate which opens to the previous area. However, astute players who've mastered the mechanics of climbing can actually reach this area first, as I did my first time playing the game. The Boneworks devs have not dictated a certain way their levels need to be completed, and there is going to be many a time that climbing will allow you to sequence break levels. The next area has a ladder that, when you climb it, pulls a platform down. It's a neat trick exclusive to VR because it's dependent on the player physically attempting to climb without having the feedback necessary to realize that they haven't left the ground. The next area is a prime example of a puzzle that can be bypassed with some clever climbing. On the other side of the room is a grate that opens when a button is held down. On our side, there's a weighted object that can hold it down, but attempting to cross now will just drop the way across. It's a fine puzzle, except you can solve it by placing another object on the button, then climbing atop the moving platform and pulling it down from the top until you can climb inside. This drops down into the first of several story monitors, where a real-world character relays information to the player as well as a gun. I didn't shoot this one because I had just gotten my gun and was reloading it. This leads into a weird section where a giant cube will suck up anybody walking on the street and dump them back into the trash compacting room. What's weird about it is that the actual street it patrols that the player can access is limited, and it never comes up again. I guess somebody was just proud of the script they made, and this little sequence is a demonstration of the technology. We passed by a section where this quarantine wall had popped up in the first level, effectively completing a large loop around the museum. While that's neat, it makes me wonder why subsequent playthroughs weren't offered the ability to skip the tutorial that would land the players here instead of the museum. The game unfortunately quickly runs into the new Valve problem of putting the puzzle before the logic. Like, why there's an area with ramps to push down is a mystery, especially considering the amount of effort it would take to get them back up again. Or how about the giant catapult that launches you across the street? I don't exactly get what everyone's problem with this tech corporation is, considering all people seem to do here is build physics contraptions. Does that mean that the sandbox mode being boring is diegetic storytelling? This brings us into the next level, Runoff. There's a confusing section where another person closes a door and passes us a rifle before it fully closes. Okay, so if they wanted to help us, they could just open the door again. That's what the button does, I know because we get there later and press it. This person doesn't come up again. We don't know who this person is, and for all three people who care about the story, it's not an alternate reality version of us. My best guess is other people were supposed to be in the game and the idea got dropped but not before appearing in one of the trailers. This section's interesting because, again, there are many ways of completing it. Maybe I've played a few too many linear games, so any interactivity impresses me at this point, But there was nothing quite like realizing I could hop this railing and climb a pipe to bypass an entire puzzle. Opening the door reveals the drone enemies, and this should probably have been the first introduction to them in the game. The streets should have only had zombies. First level being zombie exclusive is code in the shooter handbook. This leads into a long shooting section with the drones, which best utilizes their design as enemies for longer range engagements. But this is definitely an area that Stress Level 0 needs to see improvement in going forward, as their AI is rather simple, not utilizing cover or attempting flanks. And here's a door that has the balls to tell you it's going to lock if you let it close, and it will actually do it. The Madmen. One of the problems with the game is demonstrated here, and that's the reloading while crouched. The ammo supply is tied to your character's waist, which is almost impossible to reach if you're crouched down, so you can't effectively reload while in cover. But even the basic act of using cover can render the challenge to the drone enemies effectively moot, since they won't make effective attempts at flanking maneuvers. This one appears to make an attempt at a flank, but actually it's just attempting to gain a line of sight again, as it doesn't seek cover once it does find me. For a short section I used the ACOG M16, which does not properly appear on the spectator camera as it did in-game. It does use actual magnification, which can be hit or miss in VR for me. It works here, and it's interesting that aiming in VR can be somewhat contingent on your ability to aim in real life, which can be aided if you have the ability to aim while keeping both eyes open. Another physics puzzle, this time unskippable, which is unfortunate because it's my least favorite variety, the floating barrel kind. But after one more long-range combat sequence, we drop down into a grimy trash collection area, which effectively starts the strongest part of the game where it really opens up. Before, it was strong sections punctuated with weak physics puzzles, and while those never really go away, they do take a backseat to the mechanical core of Boneworks as a first-person shooter. This starts with the first level, sewers. Yeah, I get it, sewers and first-person shooters. I spent time complaining about how bad the sewers in Mournhold were, so let's contrast that with a sewer level that I like. The area is dark and moody, its cramped interiors means the game is forced to focus on its mechanical strengths rather than its physics simulations. It doesn't use the Virgin Raycast drones, but the Chad projectile zombies. There is also a strong weapon flow, unlike the previous level where you find 2 Glocks after you find several M16s. This is my favorite trap in the game. The area is also constantly changing. There isn't the boring repetition of most sewer levels, and most importantly, the sewers don't overstay their welcome. This leads into another great level, Warehouse. A more open level, the first half revolves around crossing a wall into the second. It's a beautifully short level, displaying a level of creative competence regarding the mechanics and abilities of the player. You could go the obvious way around the building clockwise, but with a little climbing, the other way works as well. A little more climbing and you can get in through the roof, bypassing the battery section entirely. Once you're past the wall, you're presented with another obstacle. It can be beaten with further climbing by landing a jump from the first wall or by fighting through this building to the roof. This enters the final section, a train stump rife with drones. It's easier to criticize than it is to praise, so consider my short commentary a testament to the quality of the levels. Arriving at Central Station, the player is greeted by an amazingly atmospheric rainy train station, which is a great place to talk about the music since it's the cover of the OST. This is the work of Michael Wickhoff, who did a fantastic job. It seems that, working on Stress Level Zero's other 2 games, his talents as a game composer have only grown. The way I would best describe the soundtrack is that it makes the world feel hollow, which sounds like an insult, but that's what the game is going for. The world is a literal simulation built on shady practices. The cheery tunes sound produced the same way corporate music is produced, while the melancholic tracks nail the atmosphere of the game.
Pick it up. Pick it up.
Central Station is another great level as it loops around on itself, but still provides a straightforward progression. You're never presented a choice in directions, which risks getting stuck in one so you can't explore the other route. The weapon flow of Central Station is a little weak, but I would say that's because the level runs long once you get to the trolley section. This leads into the tower proper, which is where the game starts to crack, but it's still holding strong. There are some performance issues on this level, even after I neutered the game in order to stabilize the frame rate while I record. I don't play older games because I have a fairly weak computer. The problem is that the tower is a fairly complex level that should have been cut in half. Hell, considering the matter reclamation bin at the literal halfway point, it may have been 2 levels at one point. The base courtyard is a constant battle between zombies and drones, which at best is a loose metaphor for the system combating internal corruption, but it should have been done in a more performant level. There's a bit of an annoying keycard game where you get one key to unlock a door to get another key to unlock a door to get a final key you need, all of which happens within 20 meters of each other. Things stabilize once again once you start climbing the tower until you reach the upper ring where you're presented with a choice between left and right. Each path is a different combat segment, which is a fine idea by itself, but it's again packed into an unstable level. But it also means that anyone who is fully exploring levels is going to do one of these sections backwards, and then will have to run the whole length of it again to collect everything. And God bless anyone who got the Boneworks crate in the center, especially if you fell at least once doing it, because that entails climbing the now empty tower again. But hey, we're finally at the time tower. This is basically the final boss of the game. It's a combat segment where you have to use these pneumatic cannons to reconnect some balls to the main ball. I'm pretty good at it now, but trust me, trying to figure out how to aim these things while fighting off enemies is a really fun challenge. But it's not a fitting final boss considering the experience up to this point. Well, at least it was fun. After fixing the time tower, we get transported to some kind of reference and step off into the void, starting the credits sequence. And the game definitely doesn't end with a 20-minute fuck you to the player and everything the game had been mechanically designed around. I mean, this game that's strengths are maneuvering in VR while using physically rendered weapons and well-balanced firearms to fight in a dystopic abandoned simulation that nailed 5 levels of atmospheric first-person shooting is definitely suited to throw the player in a fantasy prison cell with another bad physics puzzle that I just straight up ignore into a forced arena section that you can't bypass or climb out of, a short climbing section that ends in a fistfight with a guy that has too much health and far too much self-conflict symbolism before having the player walk across a massive empty space and actually physically climb a snake eater tier ladder so they can watch a cutscene. A cutscene that amounts to the confusing message of how virtual reality and big tech corporations are a bad thing. I said I wouldn't talk about the story, and this is why. Boneworks ends at the time tower. What story it has is inferred from the environment. Smash the monitors when you see them. Skip the cutscenes when they play. Don't bother with the final 3 levels. There's a Half-Life Zen joke in here somewhere, and I don't have the spirit to make it. With time, Stress Level 0 have made some solid improvements to the game. At some point I'll have to cover the topic of post-launch updates, one of the main reasons I generally don't analyze new games. Mid-level saving was a nice addition, and making the sandbox module more prominent and available to all players was a good change, but overall the campaign was otherwise untouched, with SLZ instead focusing efforts on more ancillary content. To start, there's the shooting range level, which is actually a genuine bonus level with areas to explore and enemies to fight, and a new handgun to use. I think they did a good job with this level as it plays to the game's strengths mechanically. At least until they got nervous the player may have run out of ammo and give the player 4,000 rounds to complete a puzzle. That's kind of embarrassing. This level is complete with a time trial course for handguns that's kind of confusing and easy to miss targets, and also doesn't have any kind of quick restart button, so I didn't bother trying to get any kind of impressive time. They also released one of the levels from the promo videos, the Redacted Chamber, which is fine, I guess. It's a boring level, but it changes slightly every time you loop through it, which is neat. There's also 2 separate horde modes. One's a variant of the Fantasyland arena from the base game, and it is as boring here as it was there. The other is Black Ops Zombies, which was released recently. Its a big thing is that the zombies can climb now, but only in this mode. Arenas is short challenge-based survival, while Zombie Warehouse is longer-term survival. Horde mode isn't to the strengths of the game. There simply isn't enough of an enemy variety to make the idea interesting. The game's mechanics are better suited when the player is on the offensive. And that's the core of Boneworks, really. Boneworks may be rusty in areas that I would viciously tear down in a traditional game, but it makes such a solid attempt at translating the basics of good first-person shooter mechanics in virtual reality in a way that's fun and engaging. I look forward to seeing what Stress Level 0 goes on to make using the knowledge they gained from working on Boneworks, because on their current trajectory, they're going to make Valve regret Half-Life Alyx in a few years.